Hello everybody and welcome to the first video here on the Nextdoor Panda channel. I am Nextdoor Panda. We're going to be talking about a bunch of stuff on this channel. This is the first video of what I'm aiming to make a series of sorts. We're going to be talking about Linux, talking about the transition from Windows to Linux and stuff like that. So today we're going to be talking about virtual machines. Today, we're going to be talking about virtual machines, but before we talk about virtual machines, we're going to talk a little bit about virtualization. Before I do that, I just want to say something to clarify a thought that some of you might be having. With these videos, the aim is to both cater to those of you that are completely new to this part of the world of tech, but also hopefully for those of you that are experienced, you'll also be able to leave this video with either a new thought or a new idea or new knowledge. So, with that out the way, let's get started. So when we talk about virtualization essentially is having, let's say, your computer, if let's say that's a Windows machine or a Linux machine or a Mac OS machine. Virtualization essentially allows you to have a machine within that machine. So most commonly people use VirtualBox and people use VMware and those kinds of softwares. They're the ones that that have kind of gone mainstream in a good way. And so if you talk about virtualization, that's what you often talk about. Now, when it comes to virtualization, we distinguish between two types of virtualization. Type 1 and Type 2, very creatively named. Now, Type 1 is the one that is not in VirtualBox and VMware. Type 1 is what we also refer to as bare bone or bare metal hypervising. Hypervisors are that's the software that you use to virtualize whatever machine you're virtualizing. So if you're using Windows and you have VirtualBox installed, and in that VirtualBox you have, let's say, a Linux machine, VirtualBox is your hypervisor. So when we talk about Type 1 and Type 2, Type 1 hypervisors are the bare metal ones. Type 2 are the ones that have the OS layer in between the hardware, the hypervisor, and the guest OS. So Type 2 would be something like VirtualBox, VMware, stuff like that. Type 1 is something like KVM. It's something like VMware ESXi, Proxmox. The one that we're going to be going over today is QEMU-KVM, also known as libvirt, also known as Virt-Manager. Now, today, the idea is that we're going to be taking a machine from VirtualBox and converting it to a machine that can run in QEMU-KVM. That way, essentially getting this machine from a Type 2 hypervisor to a Type 1 hypervisor. The difference here is that with Type 2 hypervisors, because the host OS is sort of in the way, it essentially means that you don't get near native performance. Doing this in a Type 1 hypervisor will give you near native performance. In my case, I have a Windows machine that I'm not going to run it because that would mean releasing the graphics card that I have passed through. But essentially, for me, it's given me better than native performance. It actually runs better in the VM now than it did when I was running Windows natively on the machine. The cool thing about it is, in my case, I use Linux as my daily driver, both on my main PC and on my laptop. And for Windows, I use for certain games that BattleEye and other anti-cheat software are not happy with. So I strictly use it for those games on that machine. So that machine only has access to any game-related information. Now, what this means is you basically separate sensitive information from information that you don't deem as sensitive. And obviously, when we talk about this, if possible, use a VPN. If possible, use a password manager. Don't use the same password for more than one account, so on and so forth. All that good practice. That's also something I might make a video on in the near future. So if that's something you'd like to see, let me know down below and I'll make it happen. Because I would like this channel to be a sort of place where I can share my knowledge and I can get new knowledge from you guys and we can sort of talk about things, learn new things from each other. That's sort of the idea with this channel. So when we talk about that and we talk about hypervisors, I think that pretty much covers the basics. I could make a video going more in depth if that's something you guys want. I would love to do that, but it will get very nerdy. So if that's something that is a bit of a turnoff for you guys, let me know and I'll try and find a way to make it a bit more surface level-y. But with that out the way, the software that we're going to be using today, we're going to be using three pieces of software. The first one is VirtualBox that you may be familiar with. Now, VirtualBox, like I said, is a Type 2 hypervisor. For me, I have several machines in my VirtualBox. So if you look here, I've got a Linux Mint machine and I've got a Windows 11 machine. Now, again, just to reiterate, the usage for this, even if you don't want to go to Linux as a daily driver, you could also, let's say you want to get into Linux slowly, or you want to use some botched up version of Mac OS, or you want to try out the new Windows 11, you're not really ready to risk it yet, this could be a way to do that. If you're running Windows 10 on a host machine, you could run Windows 11 on a guest machine. You could see what the new hype and all the fuss is all about, and then you could sort of make your decision that way. It's also good because this way, theoretically speaking, let's say there's an exe file that I've gotten from somewhere, someone sent me a PDF, I don't really want to open it because I'm not sure what's in it. I could just spin up this machine, right, one of these machines or any other machine, spin a VM up, run it in there, see if it passes the is it malicious test, and then if it does, if it's not malicious, just open it in my main machine. So it also is a kind of a sandboxing environment, but it also is a really good environment for you to just tinker around with certain things. This can also be used if you like to work with malware. Obviously, for that, I would probably advise you to use something more scalable. So maybe Dockers would be good to use because you can kind of just spin those up and down more efficiently than you could with this. But with VirtualBox and also with QEMU-KVM, you are able to take snapshots. So in my case, if you look here, I do have some snapshots that I just take every now and again just to kind of make sure that everything is up to scratch. If anything messes up, I can just revert that snapshot in like a minute and it's good to go again. So just to show you, this machine is fully operable. So if I go in and start it, it will start just fine. And this is a Linux Mint machine that I have because I like to play around with different distros. I'm gonna make one for Zurich OS, I think it was called. It's one of those OSs that cater to new users, basically, to people that are transitioning over from Windows. And so I've been meaning to try that out. VirtualBox would be a good way to do that if I want to get near native performance and thereby make a decision based on actual experience more so than virtualized experience. QEMU-KVM would be the way to go for me. Now, as you can see, this machine works just fine. We're just going to go ahead and power that off. The way that this is going to happen is we're going to be using something called QEMU-image. Now, I already have QEMU image installed, so if I go ahead and run this, it's actually not an app package, I just remember, but I do have it installed. So if I do QEMU image, as you can see, it says not enough arguments, and I can just do -- help, and it works. So what we're going to do, right, is first off, you're going to have to go ahead and find your VDI. VDI is basically the virtual disk image for your VirtualBox machine. So we're going to go ahead and find that. So in my case, this is where it's located. So we would go into VBox VMs, right? And in here, I have tester mint. And tester mint, as you can see, we have a VDI. Now, this VDI is the file that we're going to convert because the way QEMU-KVM works is that QEMU-KVM uses something called a QCOW2 image. It's a disk image, and the way this is set up is that Virt-Manager is made in a way where QEMU and KVM complement each other very well because there are some differences, but essentially they work best together. So the Virt-Manager, actually known as Virtual Machine Manager, which looks like this, you can also just run this through Virt-Manager. So if I close this down, I just do Virt-Manager, it opens up just fine. Now, this machine here is this is my Kali Linux box, and I have a Windows box. And basically, the Kali box is virtualized in a way that is similar to what VirtualBox would do. But because I'm using KVM as my hypervisor, the performance would be near native. I mean, when I'm running it, I oftentimes forget that I'm actually in a virtual machine because it just runs that natively. And this is not to talk up, praise QEMU-KVM to the heavens, but it's the truth. I mean, because of the way it does things and because of the way you're able to just pass on devices and pass through your graphics card and stuff like that, it goes on and pretty much works as it would on a physical machine. So a lot of this is something you can pretty much leave at default, but I'll show you that in a second. Now, if you go down here, as you can see, for video, we use the QXL. We use display SPI service is something that QEMU-KVM is very happy to use. Virt-Manager is very happy to use them. They work just fine. You don't really have to do anything in terms of setting them up. They pretty much just work right out the box. As for my Windows machine, I actually have, and if you guys want to see video on how I did this, I will gladly make one. Just let me know. But it is a bit nerdy because you have to do a bunch of stuff, including going into the hex code of your GPU's ROM, You have to dump it, which is a bit of a risky process if you don't know what you're doing. And basically, when I dump it, then get the graphics card back up and running on your machine, you want to go in and add some code into certain config files where it would then release this said graphics card if a certain machine is being booted up, and then when it would release it from the host machine and pass it through directly to the VM. Then when you turn it off, it would then release it from the guest VM, so that's the Windows machine in this case, and give it right back to the Linux box. And it is a bit risky, but I've essentially managed to pass through my GTX 1050 to this Windows box, and it honestly runs, and I'm not even kidding when I say this, literally better than native. So that's a way of doing it. You can do the whole pass-through thing. It's a bit gnarly, it's a bit complex, but I mean it works. It works really, really well, and it also lets you just pass through PCIe devices as well. And just pass through USB devices directly. So it's in that regard, it's something that if you use VirtualBox VMware, it's not that more complex when it comes to just working right out of the box, and you'll see that. So with that being said, let's get it going. So what we're gonna do first is that essentially you're gonna have to install a few things on your machine. Now this is gonna vary depending on the system that you're using. So for me, I use Linux Ubuntu. For the record, I have Arch, but it's on my laptop, so I don't want to hear any Arch jokes. But the point is, if you're using Fedora, you would obviously use DNF. Using CentOS, you'd do something like Yum. Using Arch-based distros, you'd use something like Yay or Pacman, depending on where it is. I imagine it would be on Pacman, but if not, you'd probably find it on Yay or on the AUR. So what you want to do is you want to install the following tools. So in my case, Ubuntu, or Debian-based distros, you just use sudo apt, and you would install QEMU-KVM, libvirt-bin, virt-inst, and bridge utils. Any dependencies that these will have with them will also be installed by default. So once you've installed those, I think it might give you an error for libvirt-bin. I think it might just be called libvirt now. In addition to these tools, you'll also want to install something called QEMU-image, and to get QEMU-image, you install QEMU-util. So if you do sudo, I believe it's in apt. As you can see, for me, it's already installed. So you want to install QEMU-utils. You want to install the other packets that we talked about. I will leave links that I deem may be of interest to you guys. I'll leave this in the description down below. If you have any links or any knowledge you'd like to share with us, feel free to leave that in the comments down. If I do something, or if I'm using a certain tool and you're like, hey, where'd you get this from? Just let me know, and I'll add it in the comments or in the description for future reference. Now, once you've installed QEMU-image, what you basically want to do is you want to go ahead and do QEMU-image. Give me a second. Here we are. In our case, just to be clear, the VDI is right here. It's right here. So that's the VDI that we're going to use. Now, keep in mind, this is going to take a while. Depending on how large this image file is, you're going to be needing a cup of coffee or two. For me, it's 8 gigs. I did this with my Kali box the other day. That was like 24, and it took a while. Because basically what it does is it converts it to QCOW2, and they end up taking pretty much the exact same amount of space on your hard drive. So what I would advise you to do, assuming that you have enough space already, is once you're done with it, you can just kind of delete the VDI file. Just delete the whole VBox box. Just delete the VirtualBox machine, and then only have it on QEMU. But that's something we're going to talk about. So what you want to do is you want to do QEMU image convert. F is for, I believe it's for file type. VDI. O, capital O, is for output. So our output is going to be QCOW2. We're going to go ahead and define the name of our input file, which is testermint.vdi. And the output file, you can just name that the same. You can just give it the same name. So in our case, testermint.qcow2. And that's it. Now you just wait. The thing about QEMU-image, it's kind of sucky in that regard. It doesn't actually show a progress bar. The other way, if you want to see a progress bar, you can hop into new window or new tab if you're a tab kind of guy or gal, and just do LL, and you can see LL is long list. So as you can see, ours is like pretty far already, because they will be pretty much the same size. So for me, it's already up on 6 gigs. It has to be around between 8.2 and 8.4. I think the Kali one that I did was like 0.1 smaller, but luckily I do have space here, so that won't be an issue for now. But as you can see, yeah, it's 0.1 smaller. And if we do a check here, it is right there. So now, congratulations, you've made your first QEMU-KVM file. You've literally converted your VirtualBox image to a QEMU-KVM image. And the good thing about QEMU-KVM is once you've installed libvirt and Virt-Manager and all that stuff, it works. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and you can spin this up in Virt-Manager. You can just spin up Virt-Manager and then go ahead and press new, create new virtual machine. And you want to go ahead and say import existing disk image. So then you want to go ahead and say forward. And in our case, we'll just go ahead and do pwd to get the current working directory. So we're going to go ahead and just copy that and paste it. And then say slash testermint.qemu-KVM. Now obviously, you could also just do browse, but this is the kind of guy I am. Then you can just go ahead and tell it which kind of system you're installing. It might not get it. Like, it just might not know which one you're talking about. So oftentimes you can just go with generic. You could try and type in the name. Like if you type, I believe Windows was 1. Yeah, sort of, right? Sort of. So oftentimes you can just do generic and it's fine. If you're doing some end-of-life stuff, if you're working with some like super old systems, there is a checkbox. You can click right there and it would show you end-of-life operating systems. So that's operating systems that are at end-of-life in terms of support and stuff like that. So find your file. You can do browse if you want, but we're just going to go ahead and leave it as is. Click forward and then choose the memory and CPU settings that you want to allocate. Now, when it says CPUs here, it's kind of misleading because it doesn't mean actual CPUs. It means cores. So in my case, this is a quad core CPU and I'm fine with allocating half of that. So I'll just give it 2. And then if I go back into VirtualBox, you can see I've given it 2 gigs of RAM. I have 16, so for the sake of this, we'll give it 4. Then we're going to go and say forward, and we can give it a name. Now, this name is important if you're doing this, if you're like, let's say you have a Windows box and you're converting it, or even just a Linux box that you want to do like full-on like graphics card pass-through, everything pass-through. This name is important to remember. So if you do this with multiple machines, don't just give them names like VM1 and VM2. Give them whatever name it's actually going to be. So in my case, I'm going to go and name this Linux Mint. Actually, just going to do it in all lowercase. Linux Mint, and you can, in our case, you can change your network selection. Now, it's good to change this if you're using a VPN, for instance. So like for me, if you're using like Nord or Express or Dashlane or anything like that, and you use a VPN, and then you go into your guest machine, your VM, it might not always register, and it might actually not even have an internet connection. I had that issue recently. If you are using a VPN and you don't want your VM to use the VPN, you just want it to use a normal connection, here's the place where you'd actually go ahead and tell it to use the host device. In my case, this is an Ethernet, so you just go ahead and just click on it, and you're good to go. If you want to customize anything else, you can check this box, but we're not going to do that just now. It's going to create the virtual machine. It's going to allocate some storage, stuff like that. And boom, Linux Mint. So congratulations. Now it's running. I'm actually going to go ahead. Yeah, there you go. It's running. So the cool thing about Virt-Manager, QEMU-KVM, I'm going to use those interchangeably. But as you can see, audio works just fine, as you probably heard there. It's going to say it's running without video hardware acceleration. Again, if you're doing GPU pass-through, this would not be an issue, presumably. And as you can see, it runs just fine. So if we run the terminal, it functions just fine. And, home directory, everything reads just fine. Again, it works fine. It works just fine. To me, at least, it works pretty much as if you were doing this natively. And again, depending on the amount of RAM you have, like this is running as if you had 4 gigabytes of RAM, allocated to a PC. And it won't have the same like hiccups you'll sometimes see if you want to send certain keys. Like if you're using Linux and you want to do like Control Alt whatever to log in through the TTY, you can do that no problem. I believe on here it's F7. So again, it works fine. You can do everything you could do on VirtualBox, and if you want to go ahead and like let's say you want to take a snapshot. The thing about snapshots is on QEMU-KVM, you can do them just fine with Linux. If it's a Linux VM, you can do them just fine. On Windows, it's not supported. I don't remember the specific reason, but it's pretty complex, and it might not happen in the future. They might not allow it in the sense that they might not be able to let you do it. So if that's something you really care about, maybe hold off for now. But if you're okay with not being able to take snapshots, and again, you could just do restore points in the Windows machine. If you really care about your snapshots, you could do that. If you're doing, if you're using a machine where you have to do a lot of snapshots because you're testing things out, that would be a way of doing it. But on QEMU-KVM, as things stand, at least on Linux hosts, you're not able to do snapshots. But if I want to do a snapshot for this one, I can go into, I believe it's in here. Yeah, so you click on this little button, this little icon here with two nice little monitors. You click plus, and you can name it whatever. So in our case, we're actually going to name it whatever. You're going to say finish. You're going to create the snapshot. I actually think that was pretty quick. Go ahead and shut it down. And again, it just works, right? Shutting down, shut off. That's it. You're done. You're done. And if you want to change the display name here, so like for mine, it said Linux Mint. If you want to, like if you're using some sort of naming convention, and you actually want the name to show up here, don't change the name. If you're using it in like other files, just name it whatever you want to name it in title. Then go ahead and click apply, and right there. So that is how you do it. As you can see, it says hypervisor KVM. This is a type 1 hypervisor. We just went from a type 2 hypervisor to a type 1 hypervisor, and I think that was pretty quick. Like, considering the fact that we just converted an 8 GB image, and then took that same 8 GB image, put it into a different piece of software, and now we're pretty much running it as if it was on a native machine, I'd say that was pretty quick. And obviously, again, if you want to pass through certain devices, like let's say you want to pass through your nice little camera that you've got, or a mouse or whatever, you can just go ahead, boom, finish, and you can use them if they're in use by other guests, by the way. So if I click yes, it will work. But then obviously, if I'm running both machines at the same time, it won't. And now for certain OSs, you won't actually need to specify like, oh, I want to use my mouse, I want to use my keyboard. It'll read it just fine. Like with Linux, I didn't specify anything because it actually has a mouse and keyboard emulator, much like your VirtualBoxes, your VMwares, and stuff like that. Okay, so just a little gotcha. If you're using VMware and you're not using VirtualBox, you're using VMware, you want to go from VMware to QEMU-KVM. You can use a tool called a VBox-Manage to pretty much convert the hard drive from a VMDK. You can convert that to VDI and then use QEMU image to convert from VDI to QCOW2. It works just fine. And again, you saw, I don't know if you could tell much of a difference there, because again, obviously I am screen recording this, so there might be a slight delay or whatever on that end as well. But hopefully you can see the practical use of why you do something like this. And on that note, thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I hope you were here all the way through. I know it's a bit of a long one to start off with, but nonetheless, I hope you gained some new knowledge. I hope this inspired you to maybe give type 1 hypervisors a shot. And again, if you'd like to see me do a video on how to do the whole GPU pass-through thing and pretty much get a near native machine running, which again, just for the record, the Windows VM that I have has successfully gone right through BattleEye and Easy Anti-Cheat and all that stuff. It's fine. It runs just fine. I didn't have to tweak anything. I didn't have to trick those pieces of software to think that I'm not actually on a virtual machine. So that won't be an issue for you if that's something you're concerned about. However, if you would like to harden a sandbox, I've actually done a lot of work on that for the last 9 months. So if that's something you'd like to see a video on as well, hardening a sandbox or hardening a VM, potentially avoid stuff like that, or if you want to use it for, as a malware testing environment or something like that, and those malwares don't get triggered unless it's actually on a real machine, you can alter a lot of artifacts, and in some cases quite easily. So if you want me to show you a video doing that kind of stuff, let me know down below. And if you haven't already, subscribe, ring that bell, like this video if you liked it, dislike it if you disliked it. Follow me on Twitter at N3XDP. On that note, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Ciao, ciao.